in the shadowed hollows of eastern Kentucky, where dawn's mist lingers in fern-filled gullies and the roar of civilization feels a world away, lies a story so peculiar it's haunted scholars for nearly 2 centuries. It begins in late autumn of 1834, when Reverend Ezekiel Morrison and his 9-year-old twin daughters, Rebecca and Rachel, arrived at Pine Hollow, a Baptist congregation tucked into the Cumberland foothills, so remote that few maps even marked its existence. What the Morrisons unearthed in 3 short days was chronicled in Pastor William Phillips's private journal, discovered only when the old meeting house was torn down in 1987. And the entries describe a series of events so precise, so inexplicably accurate, that neither theology nor psychology can fully account for them. Ezekiel Morrison, a 34-year-old widower with prematurely silvering hair and the weathered gait of a man accustomed to mile after muddy mile on backwoods trails, rode into Pine Hollow at sunset on November 15th. He carried only a leather satchel with his Bible, a few simple belongings, and a small journal in which he recorded spiritual reflections. Alongside him walked his twin daughters, Rebecca, whose warm laughter and ready grin lit up any room, and Rachel, quieter, as if she were listening first to the world and then speaking its secrets back to you. That first evening, over a humble stew cooked by Pastor Philip's wife, the twins announced details no child could have known. Rebecca asked, without prompting, whether Mrs. Philip's roses by the east fence had recovered from the blight that nearly destroyed them 3 summers before. The pastor's wife, spoon frozen in midair, stared at her. She hadn't mentioned the lost roses to anyone in decades. Rebecca merely said, "I dreamt of petals last night, and I thought of your garden." The next morning, Philip's journal hushes the scene. Before dawn, Ezekiel sat by a smoldering hearth, his face drawn. "The girls had strange dreams," he told the pastor. "Not dreams of distant places, as before, but dark ones, images that don't fit childhood fancy." Before Pastor Phillips could probe further, Rebecca appeared at the cabin door. "Under the 3rd floorboard by the altar," she told him clearly. "You've hidden something that doesn't belong there." Phillips nearly fell. Beneath that exact board, he'd stashed a small brown bottle of whiskey, wrapped in a faded blue baby blanket, remnants of the child he'd lost 5 years prior. Not a soul knew of this shameful secret. But Rebecca knew it as though she'd watched him bury it. When Pastor Phillips stammered questions, Rachel spoke up. "It was a blue blanket, soft as a lullaby," she added, her quiet voice carrying weight. And that afternoon, trembling, he handed over the bottle. The twins' uncanny accuracy left him pale. Sunday broke cold and windy, the kind of day that rattles window panes and deepens the lines on faces. Ezekiel preached with his usual fervor, a call to confession, to renewal. But as the service ended and congregants drifted out, Rebecca and Rachel moved among them like 2 angels in plain clothes, exposing hidden truths. To Samuel Turner, the prosperous farmer, Rebecca murmured, "Mr. Turner, isn't it true you've taken coins from the offering plate? You plan to replace them, but confession brings peace." Turner's cheeks drained of color. For months, he'd skimmed funds to cover a bad investment, promising himself he'd make good eventually, until the girls called him out before God. Next, Rachel approached Martha Whitfield, trembling widow and moral pillar of Pine Hollow. "Your husband didn't die in an accident," Rachel said softly. "He's alive in Missouri, and you hide his letters." The old woman sank against the pew. 15 years ago, her husband had vanished in the night, taken their savings. She'd claimed an accidental death to protect her children's futures. The twins spoke of those letters no soul knew existed. They went on. The local physician, the Miller family with their hidden, mentally challenged son stowed away from gossip, even young Thomas Brett, whose secret visits with a married woman had been whispered rumors. Each revelation landed like a stone in still water. Ripples of shock, shame, tears. But the most shattering moment came when Rebecca strode to the pulpit, placed her small hand on the carved wooden cross, and spoke in a voice that carried through the hushed sanctuary. "This ground is holy," she said, "but it's stained by a tragedy no one here admits." Every eye turned. The Whitmans didn't perish in a house fire, Pastor Phillips. They died right here, in this room, and some of you know why. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Years ago, a family named Whitman had been lost to a fire in the meeting house, officially blamed on stray embers from the stove. But the twins hinted at a darker truth. Whispers of betrayal, secrets extinguished in flame. That accusation cracked the community's composure. Pastor Phillips gripped the pulpit until his knuckles whitened. Over the next 48 hours, the Morrisons unpacked more hidden histories. Ezekiel stayed calm, though evidence of exhaustion lined his face. He later admitted to Phillips and to his journal that he had initially believed his daughter's insights were immature intuition. But the specificity of their knowledge, the emotional wounds they exposed, defied any natural explanation. On their final morning, as mist curled around the cabin, Ezekiel gathered the congregation outside. "My children are gifts," he told them gently. "But they also remind us that God's mysteries touch every life." Rebecca and Rachel stood at his side, their arms around one another. Then Ezekiel closed service with a blessing, and they departed down the slippery path toward the next hollow, leaving Pine Hollow forever changed. Pastor Phillips recorded every detail in his leather-bound journal, sealing it away in the meeting house walls. 3 souls, he, Ezekiel, and the twins, knew what had happened. Yet, even as grudges thawed and long-held disputes found resolution in the weeks that followed, no one could explain how 2 9-year-olds knew more than any human should. Today, the old meeting house is rubble. The journal resides in a university archive, and researchers still debate the Morrison twins' gift. Clairvoyance, divine intervention, or something science has yet to understand. Pine Hollow's descendants carry the legacy in whispered tales around hearth fires, reminding us that sometimes the most unsettling mysteries lie not in distant galaxies, but in the quiet revelations of a child's mind. In the weathered wooden pews of Pine Hollow's little church, an uneasy hush settled as the twins' tale unfurled. For 16 years, the Whitman tragedy had been the settlement's unspoken wound, an atrocity quietly covered by ash-gray lies. Back in the winter of 1818, Pine Hollow was little more than a cluster of cabins clinging to the holler, barely 50 souls eking out a life on unforgiving land. Among them, Jacob Whitman was more than their blacksmith. He was a pillar, strong, steady, his hammer ringing out trust. Mary, his wife, soothed pains with herbs and midwifed the hardest births with gentle confidence. And their 9-year-old twins, Hope and Faith, were the village's light. Golden-haired, blue-eyed, they sang hymns in perfect harmony and tended the sick by their mother's side. The official records, Those neat, yellowing pages Pastor Phillips inherited told a simple story. On a blizzard-blasted night, a candle overturned, the house caught flame, and the entire family perished. Their charred remains were laid to rest beneath unremarkable headstones, and life marched on. But tonight, Rebecca Morrison shattered that narrative. She, no relation to the Whitmans, stood before them, voice calm but eyes fierce, as she painted details no outsider could know. Elder Thompson, his gait stiff with 73 years of wear, rose at her words. "Child," he rasped, "you speak of things from before your time, of places you've never walked. How can these tales be yours to tell?" Rebecca met his challenge without flinching. "Faith bore a birthmark on her left shoulder," she said, voice hushed. "Hope on her right ankle. Faith clutched a wooden doll carved by Jacob. Hope wore a silver locket containing a lock of her mother's hair. On that last night, Faith wore her blue Sunday frock. Hope was in her nightdress, fever hot." A shiver ran through the older congregants. Mrs. Thompson gripped her husband's arm, pale as the winter moon. The twins, Jacob's daughters, had never left witness to testify. Yet here was this girl, Rebecca, recounting their very garments as though she'd seen them. "The fire did not kill them," Rebecca continued, voice steady now. "They fled to the church, begging sanctuary, because they were hunted." She paused, letting her words hang. The silence felt alive, as if the church itself held its breath. Pastor Phillips' mind flickered back to hushed whispers he'd long ignored. Glances exchanged when the church's foundation was mentioned. Families secretly placing flowers on an unmarked patch of ground. Samuel Turner, already uneasy from earlier accusations about his handling of church funds, slammed a hand on the pew. "This is madness," he barked. "Nonsense from children trying to frighten us." Yet even as he spoke, a trickle of confessions trickled out. Mrs. Carter remembered blood-red stains that no scrubbing could erase. Old Benjamin Foster recalled mournful cries in the night, dismissed as the wind. Dr. Hayes cleared his throat, the weight of professional embarrassment giving him resolve. "When I repaired the eastern wall 3 years ago, I found bone fragments mixed with the mortar." His admission fell like a hammer, shaping reality into something new and awful. Ezekiel Morrison, Rebecca and Rachel's father, had stood silent, arms folded, as the congregation fractured. Now, Pastor Phillips turned to him. "Ezekiel, how do your girls know these things?" Morrison's gaze swept the room, sorrow and resolve mingling in his weathered features. "Their mother, Sarah, has second sight, yes. But the girls' gift goes further. They dream of places they've never seen, relive moments from before their birth. I once thought it a divine blessing. Now I fear it is a burden. They carry the weight of our secrets, our sins." At that, Rebecca and Rachel rose together. For a heartbeat, they were just two frightened children at the heart of a storm. "We do not choose these visions," Rebecca whispered. "We see what was, what is, sometimes even what might be." Rachel's hand found her sister's. "Hope and faith visit us in dreams," she said. "They want their story told." When silence reclaimed the room this time, it was the silence of people staring into an abyss. Pastor Phillips felt its pull. He could dismiss this as fantasy, or he could pursue the truth and risk tearing his congregation apart. That night, he lay staring at the church's rafters, sleep beyond reach. His predecessor, Pastor Morai Hayes, had chronicled Pine Hollow's history with obsessiveness. Except, he noticed, the winter of 1818 was conspicuously thin on detail. Entries mentioned storms, shortages, even a handful of deaths among the elderly. But the demise of one of their leading families barely merited a line. Under candlelight the next morning, Phillips rooted through musty trunks in the vestry. He unearthed a battered leather journal, Hayes's own hand scrawled across the cover. Its pages, water-stained and brittle, revealed a nightmare. Jacob Whitman had uncovered rampant corruption, embezzled tithes, stolen travelers' provisions, even foul play against strangers passing through the hollow. He demanded confession at a midnight council. Voices had risen, accusations flew. By dawn, Jacob and his family had fled to the church for mercy. But they were dragged away, silenced forever. Hayes confessed his complicity, begged divine forgiveness, and agreed to bury the truth. Phillips's hands trembled as he closed the journal. The church floorboards he'd mended concealed more than rot. They covered murder. Every hymn, every prayer, had echoed over hidden graves. He wondered, how could the Morrison twins know this? His thoughts were interrupted by a whisper at the door. Rebecca slipped inside, her braid catching the lantern light. "You found Pastor Hayes's journal," she stated, as if reading his mind. "Behind the loose stone in the foundation." Phillips's breath hitched. That detail was not in the ledger he'd found. It was in the twins' revelations. "How did you know?" he managed. "Faith showed me in a dream," Rebecca answered simply. She wanted the truth brought to light. More questions roared in his mind, but he only asked, "What else do you see?" Her eyes grew distant. Not just what happened, but why. Jacob discovered that funds for the church came from stolen travelers, men left to die on the trail. Their blood built our sanctuary. She glanced toward the window overlooking the cemetery. That ground is cursed. Hope and faith cannot rest. Phillips felt the walls close in. The foundation of his ministry, soaked in betrayal, threatened to crush him. But even as dread clawed inside, his rational mind demanded proof. The next dawn brought a stranger, a well-dressed horseman from Lexington, calling himself Thomas Brennan. He carried letters from Marcus Webb, a traveler who'd vanished near Pine Hollow in 1819, carrying a fortune for land investments. Brennan sought to trace those funds. Phillips sat forward as Brennan introduced himself, heart pounding. Marcus Webb's name was inked in Hayes's journal among missing men. Before Phillips could respond, Rebecca appeared at his side. "Mr. Webb had a gold watch," she told Brennan, voice unwavering. "His initials are inside the cover, and it's cracked from the fall when his horse threw him." Brennan's composure cracked like a mirror. "How do you know that?" he demanded. The detail was private. Only he and his brother had ever seen the watch. As Rachel materialized beside her sister, Pastor Phillips realized the truth he faced. The girl's insight defied reason. Whatever force guided them, it had uncovered Pine Hollow's darkest secret. And now, there was no turning back. Behind the old church, the watch lay buried. Elder Thompson confessed in a low voice, alongside his money bag and the horse's bridle. He'd hidden them there after that grim night on the mountain trail. The revelation hit Pastor Phillips like a punch to the gut. If these 9-year-old twins were right, and Marcus Webb's belongings lay secret beneath the graveyard soil, then children had somehow glimpsed truths no normal mind could know. Even more, tangible proof of robbery and murder would shatter everything Pine Hollow stood upon. Brennan leapt down from his horse, eyes blazing. "Dig now," he ordered. "If those children speak the truth, we're staring at evidence of violent crime right here." Elder Thompson, 73 and fragile as a winter branch, hobbled forward. He was the last living member of Pine Hollow's founding council, men who had built this settlement in blood and desperation. "You speak of things you don't understand, stranger," Thompson rasped, the weight of authority in his cracked tone. "We were God-fearing folk who did what we must to survive." "Survival doesn't excuse murder," Brennan shot back. "If these charges hold true, this whole town rests on corpses." Rebecca's pale blue eyes met Thompson's with unsettling calm. "The nightmares stopped after the first year, didn't they?" she asked softly. "You told yourself God had forgiven you." The old man's stoicism shuddered. "Child," he whispered. Rachel stepped forward. "No one knows about the dreams where Marcus Webb begged you for mercy. No one but us." Her words fluttered in the cold morning air like a verdict. Thompson sank onto a stump. "It wasn't meant to go this far," he faltered. "We only wanted the gold. We were starving, our children sick, and winter closing in. But Webb resisted, and then his confession lingered like funeral smoke." Pastor Phillips, heart pounding, realized he stood at the edge of a reckoning. Ezekiel Morrison, silent until now, laid a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Tell the truth," he murmured. "The children speak what demands to be heard." By midday, a handful of men, picks and shovels in hand, clawed at the earth behind the church. The twins guided every stroke. Ground gave way 3 feet down to a small, metallic thud. Their shovels struck something solid. Brushing the dirt revealed a tarnished gold pocket watch, its crystal spiderwebbed precisely as Rebecca had described. Inside the cover gleamed the initials M.W. nearby. A decayed leather pouch confirmed the money bag, and the rotted horse bridle lay unrecognizable but present. "This watch matches Webb's letters exactly," Brennan announced, voice clinical. "The crack, the engraving, even the chain link, every detail." But it was Thompson's reaction, a gaunt man whispering prayers or apologies, that proved damning. "There were others," he confessed, voice fragile. "Webb wasn't the first. He wasn't the last. This mountain trail, we used it to kill travelers loaded with coin. We built Pine Hollow on their misery." As the sun dipped low, Phillips wrestled with a deeper mystery. How could 2 9-year-olds know details of crimes before their birth? Ghost stories? Psychic trickery? The truth was more unnerving than any legend. Dawn's first gray light brought county officials, a sheriff, a territorial judge, and 2 federal marshals already probing trail disappearances. Judge Harrison, stern with silver hair and steel-gray eyes, established court inside the very church whose foundation was soaked in blood. Everyone gathered: villagers, council elders, magistrates, an audience to history's unspooling. Judge Harrison called Rebecca first. Standing on the witness plank, she seemed impossibly small beneath the high rafters. "Miss Morrison, how do you know where Webb's effects lay hidden?" Her answer was plain as daylight. "Faith Whitman spoke to me in a dream. She said the same men who killed her family killed travelers, and she wanted her story told." Rachel stepped up. "We dream it all. Their last words, their fear, their pain." She glanced at Brennan, then back to the judge. "We feel echoes left behind by injustice," the courtroom murmured. Sheriff Mackenzie rifled through notes. "How many died on these trails?" he asked. Rebecca counted off on tiny fingers. 11 over 3 years. Mostly lone travelers with money for land or business. One was a preacher named Samuel Collins, riding a bay mare marked by a white star. Mackenzie's face went pale. "Samuel Collins vanished in September of 1819. Your description matches our records." Thompson then stood trembling. "That's true, but there's more." worse than the murders. Silence followed, weighty as a gravestone. I told Jacob Whitman about our deeds, hoping family loyalty would bind him. Instead, he swore to expose us all. Pastor Phillips's chest tightened. Jacob was Thompson's own brother-in-law. We couldn't risk it, Thompson confessed. On December 21st, 1818, we lured Jacob, Mary, and their twin girls here to the church, thinking sacred ground would protect them. But we were desperate men. He bowed his head. We killed them. Rebecca, white-faced but resolute, whispered, "Tell them about the babies." She was 8 months pregnant, Thompson sobbed. Her doctor said the twins might have lived if we'd sought help instead. But we couldn't. His voice broke entirely. Their souls cried out for justice. Rachel's voice filled the still air. Faith and Hope Whitman died that night, and their unborn sisters too. 4 children lost. A hush fell. The theological shock reverberated. Children unborn possessing voices of vengeance. Dr. Hayes, the town's healer, admitted they'd known of the pregnancy, but dismissed the babies as too young to need burial rites. Ezekiel Morrison's soft voice rose. Every life has significance. God counts each soul. Judge Harrison turned back to Thompson. You confessed to the murders of the Whitmans, the unborn, and 11 travelers? I do, Thompson whispered. Samuel Bradford and Marcus Perry aided me. We all share the guilt. The judge nodded to Sheriff Mackenzie, who rose to arrest the 3 elders. But Harrison raised a hand. Not yet. First, I need to understand something else. How these children, too young to know any of this, could know so much. Rebecca looked up, calm as moonlight. Some truths refuse to stay buried. The dead speak through us. Then, Judge Harrison said, tell us where the other victims lie, so we can bring their remains home. The twins closed their eyes, as if listening to distant voices. Rebecca opened them. Some in an old mine shaft east of town. Others thrown into Devil's Creek, where the current cuts deepest. 3 are hidden beneath the church floor, bones mingled with its stones. The words fell like tolling bells. In that moment, Pine Hollow's fragile world fractured. The church, once a sanctuary, stood revealed as a monument to sin. Yet in the hush before justice dawned, 2 children bore witness to every soul crying out from unmarked graves, determined that at last their suffering would be heard. The moment word spread that 3 bodies lay hidden beneath the church floor, a cold wave of shock rippled through everyone gathered. Pastor Phillips froze mid-prayer, the awful realization crashing over him. For years he had led worship, blessed communion, and offered salvation, all while standing unknowingly atop unmarked graves. Sheriff Mackenzie turned to Judge Harrison, voice tight with urgency. Your Honor, if we're to confirm these allegations, we'll have to break open the church floor. Judge Harrison's eyes darkened. And we shall, he said. But first, I need the full picture. Elder Thompson, tell me exactly where the stolen money went. What became of the victims' belongings? Thompson's gaze dropped to the worn wooden pews. Every penny, every object, was poured into building this settlement, our church, the schoolhouse, the mills. We convinced ourselves that we were turning ill-gotten gains into something righteous, that God would forgive us if we used blood money for holy ends. And their families? The judge pressed. Did any of you think of the widows, the children, the parents who never knew their loved one's fate? A hush fell, broken only when young Rachel Morrison lifted her chin. Her voice, small yet piercing, carried stories far beyond her 9 years. Marcus Webb left behind a wife, Elizabeth, and 2 little boys. Samuel Collins was engaged to Catherine, who pined for him until she died of consumption 3 years later. The others had families too, people who spent years in grief without closure. Her detail was unsettling. These weren't just names on a ledger, but real lives, dreams cut short. The twins spoke of the dead as if they had known them, cradling their stories like fragile treasures. Judge Harrison stood, commanding silence. This court will recess while we investigate fully. Sheriff Mackenzie, arrange for the church floor to be excavated and scour the sites identified by these children. Elder Thompson, Samuel Bradford, and Marcus Perry will remain in custody until formal charges are laid. As the 3 old men were led away in shackles, the stunned congregation drifted out in muted disbelief. 16 years of carefully spun lies collapsed in a morning. Yet for Pastor Phillips, the deepest mysteries remained. How could 2 9-year-olds know such hidden truths? What did that say about death, the soul's persistence, and the thin veil between this world and the next? In the empty sanctuary, the Morrison twins stood hand in hand, exhaustion etched on their young faces. "Papa," Rebecca whispered to their father, Ezekiel Morrison, "may we go now?" The voices are growing loud again. Ezekiel drew them close. "Soon," he promised. "But first, we must help these people grasp what you've revealed." By midday's height, the excavation had begun behind the church. Over 3 painstaking days, Judge Harrison's team lifted planks, scraped away packed earth, and unearthed undeniable proof. 3 skeletons resting among the original foundation stones. Personal effects: a gold ring inscribed J.P., a silver-handled knife, matched missing person reports from 1818 and 1819. And there, around the 3rd skeleton's neck, lay the copper cross described by the family of Robert Chen, the traveling minister who vanished as he carried church donations. When the community reconvened on the 4th day, Judge Harrison spoke to the silent crowd. 11 men were murdered along these trails between 1818 and 1820. Their killers used the stolen money to found and fortify this settlement. When the Whitman family uncovered the secret, they were silenced to protect it. Before him stood Thompson, Bradford, and Perry, men so old they would never see freedom again. Their guilt was carved into every line of their faces. But it wasn't the violence alone that horrified Harrison. It was the cold, calculated cruelty. These murders were no crime of desperation. They were systematic, premeditated, and fueled the construction of a godly community. Pastor Phillips listened, heartbreaking, as the foundation of his faith crumbled beneath him. Every sermon he'd preached, every hymn he'd sung, had been built on bones soaked in treachery. Yet it was Rebecca who offered the deepest insight. "Judge," she said, stepping forward beneath the cross that had presided over 16 years of deceit, "may we speak of forgiveness?" The judge, now accustomed to her uncanny wisdom, nodded gently. "Certainly, child." Rachel joined her sister. "We forgive those who wronged us," Rebecca began, "because we know fear can drive people to terrible acts. But forgiveness does not erase the need for justice. These men must answer for their crimes, and the community must restore what was stolen from the victims' families." Judge Harrison turned to Ezekiel Morrison. "What of the church and buildings built with ill-gotten gains?" Ezekiel's lined face glowed with conviction. "The sins of our fathers need not condemn their children. If we choose righteousness now, we must confess, repent genuinely, and make restitution." Pastor Phillips found his voice. "We will consecrate this building anew. We'll rebury the remains properly, compensate the victims' families, and build a memorial so these crimes are never forgotten." Solicitor Brennan, recording every word, looked up. The Webb estate is pursuing full recovery, stolen funds plus damages for 16 years of anguish. Thompson, frail and shivering, murmured, "The money is spent, on upkeep, on families, on this community. There's nothing left." Judge Harrison's verdict was swift. The church and other structures would be sold, the proceeds distributed to the victims' kin. Pine Hollow, as a settlement, would be dissolved. A collective gasp rose. Homes, livelihoods, a way of life, erased by the sins of the founders. Then came Rebecca's final revelation. "The murders didn't end in 1820, she said, voice steady. Sheriff Mackenzie sat up. "Are you saying they continued?" "Not the same killers," Rebecca explained. "But others learned their methods. People are still disappearing on these trails." A new horror gripped the assembly, a legacy of violence stretching into the present. Judge Harrison rose, resolve in his eyes. "We must expand this inquiry at once." As legal matters swirled, the twins stood quietly, their sacred burden lightened at last. Ezekiel gathered them, relief mixing with worry in his gaze. "Are you ready to leave?" he asked softly. Rebecca paused, eyes sweeping the church's wooden walls. "The voices are quieter now," she said. "Faith and hope can rest." Rachel nodded, fingers entwined. "But there will be other places, other voices. Papa, why must we carry this sadness?" Ezekiel knelt. "Perhaps God gives trials only to those strong enough to bear them, and your gift serves a purpose beyond our understanding." In the weeks that followed, Pine Hollow emptied. Boards from the church were sold to pay restitution. Families scattered across Kentucky and Tennessee, bearing the knowledge that their home was built on blood. Yet everywhere they went, tales of the Morrison twins spread. A pair of girls who broke long-buried crimes with impossible knowledge. Judge Harrison's 47-page report joined the state archives, its final lines quoted in legal circles for generations. This case challenged our very notions of justice, truth, and accountability beyond death. Pastor Phillips rebuilt a ministry in eastern Tennessee, dedicating his life to helping communities face hidden sins. He never forgot those 3 days when 2 9-year-olds unmasked a web of murder with uncanny precision. The twins themselves faded from records by the 1840s. Some say they continued their father's work as traveling ministers. Others believe they renounced their gift and lived quietly. But whispers linger. Travelers still speak of encountering twin girls who reveal secrets no mortal should know, reminding the guilty that some truths demand reckoning beyond the grave. Whatever the reality, one fact endures. Truth, once unearthed, cannot be buried again. Do you believe the Morrison twins truly spoke for the dead? Might there be a natural explanation for their uncanny knowledge? Share your thoughts below, and subscribe for more mysteries that challenge everything we think we know. Until next time, remember, some secrets refuse to stay hidden forever. And sometimes, the youngest voices carry the gravest truths.